So we now talk about energy in all its various formats. Decades ago, people would only be concerned about oil, and of course, we care about oil prices and markets and so forth. But now, for a sustainable future, it is all about energy, and what does that look like? What does that mix look like? The challenge of sustainability is going to rely on clean energy and long-term reliable sources of energy. So, Your Highness, if I can begin with you, how is Saudi Arabia preparing for that transition, and what opportunities do you see?
Well, the first part of the preparation was to move from calling our ministry an oil ministry to energy ministry. It used to be oil and gas ministry, and now it is an energy ministry. I'm particularly honored also that I have, as a minister, have a full command of all the ecosystem of what it takes to have an energy strategy and the execution of that strategy. So, as an energy minister in Saudi Arabia, I have no excuse for not conducting or developing an energy strategy and executing an energy strategy with all the enablers that any energy minister could have. The way we are approaching sustainable energy strategy and the ecosystem is to make sure that we are also prepared to relate to the world. So what is Saudi Arabia is endowed with is somewhat different than some other countries. And the holistic notion of a world energy market should always be present in where you think you should go with your own energy mix and where you go with your energy strategy. Countries like Saudi Arabia is probably the biggest exporter country in the whole world. You cannot disassociate that part of you from your indigenous, local, domestic prerequisites. So actually, we are incentivized as Saudi Arabia that the more we use for our local market, our own consumption, more renewables, more gas, the more we will be freeing more liquids, which is exportable to the world oil markets, and therefore we're actually adding an more exportable amount of oil. But that's not the incentive that we have. We believe now, and this is something you will soon see or hear of within the next few months, we're building an energy strategy. We're focusing more on our energy mix. What would be the most effective economical energy mix that we have in Saudi Arabia, free of any biases of any nature. We look at the economics of it as opposed to the preferential or preferences that we may, preconceived preferences that we may have. We know for certain as Saudi Arabia now that the best power mix for Saudi Arabia, energy power mix is gas and renewable. In certain areas in Saudi Arabia, we'll have to settle for some liquids because of destination, distance, and space, and what have you, and also the amount of consumption that we have. So by 2030, I can vouch that, easily vouch that we'll be developing our gas resources. We will be quite big in terms of our renewable use, but also we have our chairman of the high-level hydrocarbon committee, Prince Mohammed, the Crown Prince, is a very challenging leader. So he's all over the place with us in terms of also engaging in manufacturing. Lots of people talk about renewable as a source of energy, but it's also a source of good source of diversity of your economy. If you are engaged in developing and manufacturing and even exporting. So our aspiration in terms of the renewable, be it solar or wind, is not just also in fulfilling our own demand as Saudi Arabia, domestic demand, indigenous demand, but also involving ourselves in manufacturing with exporting huge amount of exports if we can, plus developing our local companies, our local industries to make sure that they are become as competitive as Masdar, for example. We have aqua power, and don't be surprised that we'll have more than aqua power in this endeavor. Again, we want as an oil producer and a gas producer, we want to have a world that gives an equal playing fields to all sources of energies. Fundamentally, we are proactively engaged in convincing the world that we should be neutral on what source of energy we use, as long as we involve ourselves in mitigating the impacts that it may create. Right now, we have quite a few technologies that are in use, such as carbon sequestration, and the evolution of that is quite tremendous. We have introduced recently as Saudi Arabia the concept of circular carbon economy, which is, to me, is the right solution and a way forward for us to enforce that notion that regardless of what source of energy you use, so long as you mitigate and sequester the impact, the emission sources, gases, the emitted gases, be it carbon or methane or whatever that may cause or may be a source of the various gases that can cause climate change, so long as you can sequester that. And in our concept of circular carbon economy, we're actually going further than that. We're saying that there is, if you sequester, you could make carbon is a material. And we have to appreciate that we are dealing with something with a value to it. And if you can manufacture it and make use of it and monetize that that material, it will be a win-win situation for the whole thing. Also in Saudi Arabia, for all of that ecosystem to work, you need to be engaged in too many things. And I'm sorry for taking so much time from my friend Muhammad, but Abu Muhammad. We're doing all of that cognizant of the fact that we need to do the whole thing holistically. So it's not a disrupted or activities that are done in silos, where each silo is working in complete isolation with the rest. We have an effective efficiency program because we are, as Saudi Arabia, we believe in producing and using energy efficiently. And we, as a producer, we have to become a model of how we can produce energy in an efficient way and in an environmentally safe and sound way. I was pleased to mention a few numbers yesterday on terms of how effective Aramco is in terms of producing oil and gas with the minimal amount of emissions. We have to also be an efficient consumer of energy. It's extremely virtuous as a producing country, that we present ourselves as an efficient user also of energy. For that to happen, you need to have price reform. And now we have a very effective price reform program, which will lend support to the efficiency program. Priority to that efficiency program, we worked with our local manufacturers and international manufacturers. So for some of you, I don't know if you have, if you heard of the so-called Saudi Cafe, which is similar to the US standard in terms of how much cars are supposed to be using in terms of kilometers per liter. But we are moving towards a more efficient car fleet in Saudi Arabia, which is by 2025 will be almost as equal to the US. We have changed every standard that there is, including our building code, to ensure that these buildings, new buildings, will be more efficient. All utilities are being converted now to more efficient utilities. All manufacturers are being reformed to make sure that they are more efficient. Every air conditioner in Saudi Arabia is, and every refrigerator, every car is, we're moving in that direction. More important, we are talking about conversion of our, as I said, our energy mix, whereby we will be using more gas and more renewable. And we want to become part of the solution. Not only that, we want to be engaged with every possible partner to be proactively engaged on how we can mitigate emissions, whereby, but primarily we want to do it with a view that people have to give all sorts of energies, all sorts of sources of energy, a fair, equitable chance, so long as we mitigate these emissions. Or it is equally important to be realistic about what sort of energy mix the global economy would have. There is nobody whom I know or I know that is somewhat sensible, who would not think that by 2040 we still need a lot of oil, a lot of gas, probably a lot of coal, and a lot of renewables. So if we can agree that we could have that fair, equitable chance, I think it will be a way that would advance and help us all.
Goal number 7 is very much about clean energy and ensuring reliable sources of clean energy. So if we talk about the global mix, we've heard domestically what you're doing, but globally there is tensions about this particular issue. How can we build a multilateral system? Is it an OPEC plus similar construction that has been quite successful? Is it a way of working through the UN? How do you see building that global coalition in order to create and to reach our SDG 7?
Yeah. Mindful of the time, I think a coalition can be formed if people can settle to the principle that we should be more focused about emissions as opposed to the source of energy. You cannot entangle too many objectives in one and you think you can get away with what you desire. You cannot attend to so-called security of supply issue by saying, I don't want to rely on Middle East sources of energy, and yet you also want to achieve sustainable development goals without making sure, and in some countries, I was reading an article today about another country that says, I don't want fossil fuels, I don't want nuclear. Well, what else can you do? And you could assume, how could you assume then you could have a sustainable economic growth? Certainly, I think there is a common denominator that can bring everybody together, which is we should be focusing on reduction of emissions of all gases that may cause climate change. If that principle is there, then we should be not concerned with what type of energy you're using, and more important, where is the source of it? There is a lot of environmental policies that are being formulated now using or abusing this principle of not using energy sources from the Middle East.